Thank you. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate working with all our fine officers back here. Our job in the Forensic Science Center is to make a crime lab that you all can be proud of. Our job is to get the right answer out there at the right time so that Chief and his officers can do the job that they need to do. We made a lot of progress on that. We still have work to do, so we're working on that. I'm a toxicologist by training, which means I do drugs for a living. It's always good for a giggle someplace along the way too, that most of my research has been in how drugs get into hair. Yeah. So hopefully you all are aware of some of what's going on with opioids and drug overdoses in the country. So I'm taller. All right, get this up here high enough. Keep it staying up there. I pulled these numbers from CDC's website, Center for Disease Control. I think the main things to point out there is that, this is in 2016, we had over 100 people a day that were dying from opioid overdoses. In 2016, we had 42,000 people die from opioid overdoses. There were about 65,000 people who died of drug overdoses in 2016 alone. There were 2.1 million people who misused opioids, so those are pain medications like morphine, tramadol. Some of you may have prescriptions for these. They are legitimate drugs. They have a legitimate medical purpose, but when they're misused, they kill people. And that abuse, that killing, the consequences of that, it's estimated that it's costing us over $500 billion a year in costs. This is a real problem. Think about it. In the country in 2016, there were about 30,000 deaths from auto accidents. There were 42,000 people that died from opioid overdoses alone. So if you look at across time, what this has meant, so the green line is all drug overdoses from 2000 to 2016, and that's what we call an exponential curve that's going up there at the end. That's a bad sign. The red line is fentanyl and synthetic drugs, stuff I'm talking about here tonight. And that red line is going up exponentially. I'm terrified of what the 2017 numbers are going to hold. Because if it keeps on that pattern, we're going to double again the number of people that die. What we're seeing here in Houston, and this is what's making me really nervous. In 2015, we had 1 fentanyl case. In 2016, we had 13. In 2017, we had 24. So far this year, we already have 18. We're about a year and a half behind where the rest of the country's at around opioids. Texas has not typically had an opioid problem, but this sure looks like the pattern that the rest of the country saw about 2 years ago, and now you see where the rest of the country's at. That's what I'm worried about on this. What we see drug-wise here in Houston, so this is stuff out of about the last year's worth of data. We still see mostly cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine. That makes up about 75% of the drugs we see. Typical stuff we've seen for decades. That orange slice that's 8% farm, those are pharmaceutical tablets. They look like drug tablets, and I've got some pictures of these, that are starting to be anything and everything. And that's growing. That's the part I'm worried about. And you can see the top slice up there, the 2% heroin. Opioids have never been a real big drug here in Houston. They come through here, but they aren't necessarily used here. Now, it also worries me in this that there was another study looking at data that come out of medical examiners historically, that though those numbers are shockingly large already, they may be underestimated by a lot because of how medical examiners have been reporting deaths. So it may be that opioid deaths are actually underestimated by about 70,000. These are really sobering numbers. All right, so what is fentanyl? Fentanyl is what we refer to as a synthetic opioid, meaning it's not derived from morphine. An opioid means it is a pain medication. It works great for controlling pain. Fentanyl, and keep this in mind, fentanyl is sold often as a transdermal patch. You put it on your skin and it goes through your skin. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the fentanyl flyer and why people are worried about fentanyl. Because under the right conditions, it's very specific, it can go through the skin. But I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, that that's not what worries me most about it. But I think this is where people get the idea that fentanyl can go through your skin. Because in a pharmaceutical preparation, it can't. It's used in hospitals all over the world for anesthesia. They use it by injection. It's a really good pain management drug. It's available by prescription. There are lollipops and sublingual lozenges and patches in a variety of ways that people use it, particularly for breakthrough pain in cancer patients. It works really well for strong pain. But what we're seeing is it's often used as a cutting agent. It's added into things like heroin and other drugs. Okay, so what's got us so worried about this stuff? So what I put up here are a bunch of different opioid drugs, and some of these you may recognize, like codeine and tramadol and hydrocodone. You may have had prescriptions like for codeine or hydrocodone after you've had a tooth extraction or something like that. What I put up here is their relative potency to morphine. So drugs like codeine and tramadol are less potent than morphine. If I compare them, they're about 1/10 as potent as morphine. So that's tramadol. Hydrocodone's about half as potent as morphine. So morphine's 1, so I'm comparing everything to morphine. So I start looking at oxycodone, which is the OxyContin, oxys that people hear about some. That's about twice as potent as morphine. Heroin's about 5 times as potent as morphine. Hydromorphone, another drug you may have had after surgery or something like that, is about 5 times as potent. This one called U-47-700 is one of these new drugs that you've heard of. Sometimes they get referred to as spices and cushes and those types of things. This one was a research opioid drug. It's about 7.5 times as potent as morphine. Now you get into these fentanyls, and there's a bunch of different kinds of fentanyls. Basically, chemists have modified the structure because they're trying to find more potent drugs. So acetylfentanyl is 15 times as potent. Fentanyl is 20 times as potent as morphine. Butyryl, 25. Fentanyl itself is 100 times as potent as morphine. Now, one that we saw about a year ago, and we've seen it here more recently as well, and this is the one that we talk about a lot because it scares the crap out of me, is a drug called carfentanil. Now, it is, keeps going. The only legitimate use of it is as a large animal tranquilizer, but it keeps going. If you watch the movie Jurassic Park, it was used as the tranquilizer for T-Rex. It is 10,000 times as potent as morphine. 10,000. So a lethal dose of this is something so small you can't see it. So here's a comparison of heroin. Remember, that's 5 times as potent as morphine. Fentanyl, 100 times. And carfentanil, 10,000 times, and what a lethal dose of it looks like. I didn't bring any with me, I'm not that dumb. Don't tell my wife that. So carfentanil, you basically can't see the dose in there. It's tiny. It's like a fraction of a grain of salt. So what we see in the lab, of stuff that comes through the lab, we get cases that look like this. Poor guy that had to figure out how to get his hand in there without sticking himself on all of those syringes. Those are heroin, could be all kinds of stuff in there. But what we starting to see a lot, oh yeah, this is what we saw a year ago when we first said, uh-oh, carfentanil's here. That little baggie, you can see the size of it there, somebody's hand in it, that little baggie had 80 milligrams of carfentanil in it. 80 milligrams of carfentanil is 4,000 lethal doses. That little baggie could kill 4,000 people. Now it came into the lab with the officer that got it, thought it was methamphetamine. And I'll talk about that in a minute, why he thought it was methamphetamine. We thought it was methamphetamine when we got it in the lab, and it wasn't until we had finished testing that we realized, oh dear, that's not meth. But that was the first that showed up here that we knew of was about a year ago. We've since seen it about 5 more times. What we get a lot of are things that look like this. Anybody have a Xanax prescription? This is what a typical Xanax pill looks like. But that Xanax pill has fentanyl in it. Okay, note to self, if you are buying your pharmaceuticals from the guy on the street, don't. These are pills that are manufactured by people illegally. They look exactly like the stuff that you would get from a legitimate pharmacy. So this isn't a problem if you go to your legitimate pharmacy. But if you've got friends or family that are buying stuff off the street, this is a problem. The thing looks like a Xanax. They think it's a Xanax, but it's fentanyl. There's probably a lethal dose in that tablet. You can't tell it from ones that look like this. These aren't Xanax either. They're diphenhydramine, Benadryl. So what we're seeing is these pills that come in off the street have everything under the sun in them, and you can't tell the difference. Here's the ones that are supposed to be hydrocodones. Those are fentanyl. Here's the ones that were supposed to be oxycodones. Those were carfentanil. Probably both of those pills could have killed multiple people. That's a kilogram of fentanyl. So we've seen kilograms come through here that are being trafficked to elsewhere. A kilogram of fentanyl, that's 500,000 lethal doses. This is that U-47-700. It's also referred to as the gray death. That package probably there is many thousands of lethal doses. So we see this, and it looks like all kinds of stuff. And I put a few of these pictures there because what people get concerned about, what does it look like, what should I be afraid of? Those are the kinds of things of what it looks like in the illegal manufacture of stuff. So what do we do in the lab? Because we handle this stuff all the time, and we've had to change a lot of our procedures. So we restrict access much more aggressively to who has access into the lab. Our people work in groups of 3. So one person is working the case, one person is watching out for them, and you got a third person that's going to call 911 while somebody else administers Narcan to them, the antidote. We've increased our personal protective equipment. I brought a couple big groups, should have brought more. These are the kinds of masks that we use in the lab, and people want to hand these around, look at them. This is called an N95, which is, I think, what the officers are largely equipped with. And then if we know we're working on a case, we use one of these. It's called an N100. So if you want to take a look at those. The N95s cost about $1. The N100s cost about $10.
What's the difference?
The more filtration. The question is, what's the difference? The N100 has more filtration. It's more protection. We've got dedicated labs that we use this in. We use them in chemical hoods. But in the laboratory, we've got a lot of stuff that we can control about this. And I've got about a dozen doses of naloxone scattered throughout the lab. So that if somebody comes in contact with one of these high-potency drugs, we can continuously dose them until paramedics arrive. Here's what our lab guys look like. That's Patrick. So there are laboratories that put people in Class A hazmat suits with self-contained breathing apparatus and all that. What we're finding is it's probably not necessary. But we do, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing lab coats, they're wearing eye protection, and they're wearing masks. And this is what we work with in the lab. So I think you all are aware what opioid overdose looks like. Person has real difficulty breathing. So what opioids do is they cause you to stop breathing. It's really how they kill you. You stop breathing. Gurgling, snorting, their lips start turning blue, their fingernails start turning blue because they're not breathing, they're not getting oxygen into their bodies. They may have pale, clammy skin. Something that's really characteristic of opioids is really small pinpoint pupils. All of the opioids do that. And then if they just cannot stay awake, really heavy nodding, they're unresponsive to pain. Something that paramedics will do is what's called sternal rub. They'll rub really hard on somebody's sternum. It really hurts. And if they just don't react to that, this is something that may be going on. I've got one. This is one of the officers, so I won't hand it around, but I wanted, for the officers in particular, this is the Narcan dose that the officers are carrying. It's a little nasal injector. So you put your fingers in there and they just put it in their nose and squirt it up their nose. This is what they carry. I've talked with some of the chiefs to encourage officers to just keep it in your pocket so it doesn't get cooked in your car, and it's there on you. If you have an exposure, you're not going to make it back to your car if you really have an exposure, so if you got it on you. Yes, ma'am? Well, so, and I think it's a question a lot of people ask me, why people are using these drugs. You know this stuff is so lethal. So what happens is that kilogram of fentanyl, I can buy that on the internet for about $1,000, and I can make a whole bunch of pills out of that. So I can probably sell those as pills for millions. So I make a lot of money in it. And I can make more money at that than I can with heroin. It's the cost difference. I can buy fentanyl very cheaply, I can plus it up into a whole bunch of stuff, and I can make a lot of money on it. So the carfentanyl one, you got a big fat guy wearing short shorts sitting in his garage mixing this stuff up. So he takes that little baggie of carfentanyl, scatters it in a jug of stearates, basically builders for pills, shakes it up, puts it in his internet-provided pill mill, cranks out 10,000 pills. So each one of those crystals in that little baggie is a lethal dose. So there's 4,000 lethal doses in there. Probably of those 10,000 pills he made 4,000 that are completely lethal and 6,000 that have nothing in them. It's all about the economics. It's not really about the drug effect itself. Does that answer your question some for you? Well, the pill itself doesn't have any drug in it, and they don't know. All right, so what are the things that you can do? And certainly gearing towards the officers, one of the things we talk with the officers about is if you've got something that you suspect to be a drug, don't open the package. That's probably your first, foremost, and best protection of it is just don't open the package. When you open that packaging, that's when your exposure risk starts going up. Just leave it in the packaging, get it to the lab where we've got the controls to be able to handle it. If you think you're around drug materials, stay vigilant, watch each other. If somebody starts showing those symptoms, get them a Narcan dose. The worst that's going to happen if you give somebody a Narcan dose is it might make them a little constipated. That's the worst that's going to happen. But if you don't have it and they really need it, they're going to have a problem. So it's a very harmless drug, and it's safe to give them even if you don't really have an exposure. Know where to find these if you're out there, and know how to administer these things. They're really easy. These ones that the officers carry are really easy.
Where do we find them?
So I think it still is the case here in the state of Texas. There's a standing order at Walgreens that you can buy these without a prescription. So if you just, as a citizen, want to buy Narcan, and I'm pretty sure it's just Walgreens that has a standing order. We buy them from Walgreens. I'm not sure, I know all the patrol officers are carrying these. There's a few different forms, but that's where you just, as a citizen, can buy them.
And I sometimes, in the work I do, I find little bags.
Yep.
How do we get them to you? Through the police?
Through the police.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just don't open it. Don't open it. So this is what, you'd say you touch it. There's a lot of mythology around it that it's going to go through your skin if you just touch it. It's really probably not the case. These guys that are making these pills aren't falling over dead all the time. It's not likely to go through your skin very easily. But if you pick it up like a dusty table that's got it on there, and you pick it up, my worry is if you touch your eye, it could absorb through the mucous membrane of your eye. Or if you just can't keep from licking your elbow, touching your mouth if you've got that dose on it. You don't realize it's on your finger. You've picked it up off of something. You don't realize it's on your, you've opened that little bag. You've opened that package. You get some on your fingers. You don't realize on its fingers, and you just don't think about it. You touch your tongue. That's more, I think, where you're going to get the dose than breathing it in. It's possible, but I think it's really unlikely. Yes, ma'am?
Does moisture accentuate?
The question was, does moisture accentuate it? We worry a little bit, and we tell officers to try not to use hand sanitizers. The alcohol might make it a little bit more absorbent in the skin. But again, your skin's a really pretty good barrier. It takes some pretty special conditions to make it go through your skin. I'm more worried about it. You got it on your fingers, and you rub your eye, or you touch your tongue, and that's how you get it. So like the officers, if you wear the mask is more about keeping you from, licking your elbow, or, hello, so you're going. Well, things stop. There we go. Or like, don't lick the white stuff. Don't lick the table. No. Keep it out of your mouth. That's more where you're going to get the exposure. All right, still not advancing. Yeah. So we talk about some of the field tests. And we talk about that fentanyl flyer. So these are some of the problems. If you go, just hit the next advance, please. This is one of the field tests that's used for cocaine. So there's one that's, you can see the blue in there, that's cocaine that's reacting in it, and that's the color that they're looking for. But other things react with these field tests. So crack cocaine kind of reacts with it. Procaine, which isn't cocaine, will react with it, but things like Damperid will also give you a color change in there. So this is the problem with the field tests. If you advance again there, please. So this is another one, and hit it again. This is one that's used for methamphetamine. So the officer that thought that little baggie of carfentanil was methamphetamine had used a field tester. Well, it reacts and it looks like it's methamphetamine. So he thought it was methamphetamine from that field tester. So this is why we've talked with officers and why we don't do field testing in Houston anymore, because they get a reaction that makes them think it's a different drug than what it is. There's a hand in the back there. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I noticed you're using masks to work in. How strong is it for breathing?
Well, there is a chance that you could kick up enough dust and breathe it in. So we worry about that when we're handling large quantities of the drug. Like I say, I'm a little more, I look at the mask as a reminder not to stick your fingers in your mouth than necessarily breathing it in. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. I was also told when you have these signs on your car to keep some gloves in the car in order to pick these signs off of your.
It certainly wouldn't hurt. It's not going to hurt you at all, but I don't think it's really necessary. I mean, so if you kick it ahead a couple there, one more, and another one. Yeah, this one. So this was, we talk about that fentanyl flyer. What they did on that one was they used a field tester on the paper. Well, that's great, but you can see here, methamphetamine and fentanyl in that tester look identical. They react the same. And there actually is a color difference there, but we got about half guys in here, about 8% of guys cannot see that color difference. And that's not just because the wife tells them, you can't match your socks. That's a whole different thing. They just physically cannot see that color difference. And there's a little piece of paper down at the bottom there. That chemical that's in there makes the paper turn brown. So it's the same color as a positive for that. So they put that tester on there. They saw the color change. And in an abundance of caution, they said, ooh, that's fentanyl. And then it took off from there. It was not fentanyl on that paper. So it went to the laboratory and they tested it. It wasn't fentanyl.
Was there anything on the paper?
I don't know. I don't think there was anything identified on the paper. So, but these pictures, I put these in here so that you can see what that color reaction is. So this is really why we're not doing the field testing, because for the officers, they have to open the package to do this. So right there, they've got an exposure risk. And then the answer that they're going to get from the tester isn't necessarily telling them the right thing. So just don't test it. Just send it in the lab where we've got the controls and we'll handle it there. So hopefully that answers a little bit for you about fentanyl. This is a real issue for us. It is a scary thing. You're not going to probably walk into a hotel room and fall over dead. Keep your fingers out of your mouth. Don't lick the table. Don't open the packages. It'll probably be pretty okay. But are there any other questions I can answer for anybody? Yes, sir.
Why would anybody take anything like that? It's like a Russian roulette.
Yep.
I mean, or do they get a great high off of it?
Well, it's the same kind of high that they would get from heroin. I think largely they don't know they're taking it, because the guy that's making the drugs and selling it to them, he's putting it in there to turn a profit, and in place of the heroin that costs him more. So the person that's taking it doesn't know they don't have it. And then the fact that these pills, one pill may have it, another one may have nothing. They're used to taking 8, and by the time they take that, they've got a huge whomping dose that's going to kill them. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what chemicals make up fentanyl?
Okay, so fentanyl is its own structure. It doesn't look anything like morphine. All of these drugs were made by pharmaceutical companies to try and find things that were more potent, better pain management. But it's the same carbon, nitrogen, oxygen that's in morphine. It's just arranged in a little different form. Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything happening legislatively that is helping us?
Yeah, it's trying to manage all of these drugs is a real challenge for us, because what happens is these manufacturers are largely in China. They move along to different structures, different drug combinations that fall outside of legislative control, so they're legal. And that's why they keep changing these drugs. And trying to stay ahead of that is a real challenge for legislation. There's a lot of efforts to try and how we craft legislation to catch as many of the drugs as we can, but they keep changing. There's potential, I'm sorry?
Well, what about the opioid prescription? I mean, there's something we can do there.
There's more work about the sharing of prescriptions between doctors. As you go to the doctor now, you'll see a lot more that all of your doctors know all of your prescriptions. And a lot of that is trying to keep people from doc shopping, moving from doc to doc to doc, and getting multiple prescriptions for opioid drugs. So there's efforts like that. There were a couple other hands. Yes, ma'am.
You briefly touched on regional popularity of certain types of
Yep.
drugs. When I think of OxyContin, I think Ohio, West
Yep.
Virginia. Is it purely accessibility? What drives
You know,
regional popularity?
Yeah, so the question is what drives the popularity of drugs in particular areas? There's lots of theories about that. I'm not real sure. Some I think is the relative, basically economic situation in Houston. We have tended more towards pharmaceutical drugs here. There were more pill mills a while ago that now these kinds of pills have replaced. In the Ohio Valley, Appalachia, very poor population in that area. They had a lot more access to more pure heroin. Here it's always been black tar heroin, which is tougher to stick these drugs into. There's lots of different theories on that. What I will say is one of the things that Houston could use to work on, we're one of the very few places in the country that PCP is popular. It's actually the fourth most common drug we see in driving under the influence of drugs cases. So think about that when you get angry at somebody that may be on PCP. Baltimore is the other place that he sees a lot of PCP.
What is PCP?
PCP is phencyclidine angel dust. When you see these videos of somebody getting repeatedly tased and just not stopping, oftentimes that's somebody on PCP. It's what's referred to as a psychotic hallucinogen. It makes people pretty nuts. Yes, sir.
I think that's not a question, but something you talked about fentanyl by pharmaceutical companies. It was actually developed, as I understand, for cancer pain.
Yes. So basically all of these opioid drugs are legitimate pharmaceutical drugs. They are manufactured legally, but they're also manufactured illegally, and they are certainly packaged up to look like pills illegally.
So they're getting them, people can get them off of the internet?
Yep. And that I would caution about internet pharmacies. Sometimes those aren't as legitimate as you might hope. Certainly, like I say, if you've got friends or family or people you're concerned about that they're buying their pills from dude down the street, that's what you really need to worry about because they just don't know what they're getting. Back there, ma'am.
These drugs are made in China, how do they get into the US?
Largely through the mail. So that's part of the interest in them. It's so potent. Like that little bag of carfentanil could easily be stuffed into a letter-sized envelope and mailed in through the mail. A lot of this stuff comes through the mail. So another hand back there, ma'am.
Yes. Is there a standard policy and procedure in handling these drugs for the EMTs, nurses, et cetera?
Like I said, what we have tried to tell people is main thing is don't open the packaging. Be aware of how people around you are behaving if you suspect some of these things are around you. And really try to avoid touching your mouth, touching your eyes. That's most of what I worry about. But use PPE, wear gloves, wear a mask. It's not going to hurt you to wear those things. But don't open the packaging and get it on to the lab where we have better controls to be able to test it. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is carfentanil legal?
The only legitimate use of carfentanil, like I say, is as a large animal tranquilizer.
Okay.
It's used for tranquilizing elephants and rhinoceroses. It's the only legal, and it's an estimate that a 20 microgram dose is lethal in humans. It's never been tested. I'm not volunteering to test that one. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you tell me again ourselves from maybe scraping it up with our hands or, like dust on the table? How can we prevent ourselves from maybe accidentally doing that?
I think the main thing is if you see something, a baggie with pills, a baggie with white powder in it, don't open the packaging. Leave it there, call the police, let them collect it and get it to the laboratory. Be very cautious about touching your mouth, touching your eyes. If you think you've got it on your hands, wash your hands, soap and water.
One more question, and we'll have you stay afterwards.
Yes, sir.
What about the FDA? Do they approve and permit this medication and all the stuff that's going on here?
So if you buy hydrocodone or morphine or fentanyl with a prescription from your doctor through a pharmacy, that's FDA approved and that's just fine. The problem that arises is if you're buying these pills or patches or any of these other things off the street because you don't know what you're getting, that's where this stuff is coming through, and that's where the real problem is. All right. I'm happy to hang around and continue to answer questions, but thank you. I appreciate the attention.